Right, my name's Tim Emmett and I am a trustee of CMRE, and you may have thought you're coming to a session on next steps for new school supply, but as was outlined to you this morning, that's not what we're going to be talking about. We're very fortunate to have two very distinguished speakers with us. Professor Victor Lavy, who is Professor of Economics at the University of Warwick, indeed where I studied myself, and also William Haber, Professor of Economics at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And he is going to be talking about the long-run effects of free choice among public schools, in particular with a focus on research he's undertaken on college attainment, earnings and social outcomes at adulthood. So we're kind of taking a long-range view here. We're not looking at the short-term impact of school choice, not like we've been looking in the previous session. We're actually looking at probably what's the most crucial thing for children, young people and families, and that's life chances, and what the nature of school choice might have on how successful, on what you might achieve in later life. And he's been doing a longitudinal study on this in Israel, which he's going to tell us about. Responding to that will be Dr. Henrik Jordahl, who is Associate Professor of Economics at Uppsala University in Sweden and Program Director of the Economics of the Service Sector at the Research Institute of Industrial Economics in Stockholm, Sweden. He's a collaborator and academic partner of Gabriel Salgren, who is speaking this morning, and they're working together on some joint programs. This session is sponsored by PLMR, which is a Westminster-based communications agency that works with schools and educational organisations to build and protect reputations. So if you need a hand in any of those things, give them a call. Professor Haber.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to thank the organizers for the invitation to present some of my work here. This is a project which is part of a bigger project funded by the European Research Council, focusing on the outcomes, long-term outcomes of various educational interventions. Some of them are market-oriented, like this one. This is the city of Tel Aviv. The blue is the Mediterranean, it's on the west. Tel Aviv has 9 school districts. And in the early 1990s, I helped the city design a school choice program that changed the admission of students from zoning in neighborhoods and partly busing from the south of the city to the north to a free choice school system. All the schools in Tel Aviv are public. There are no private schools, even though this is a very part of the city, very affluent community, rich people, highly educated. Very few private schools in general in Israel. Even those that are called private are basically semi-public and they are funded by the public system. But in Tel Aviv, there are no private schools. So we decided at the beginning that the first 2 years of the program that started in September 1993, so that's almost 30 years by now, we will implement the program in an experimental way in district number 9, which is part of the south of Tel Aviv, which is under a privilege in terms of socioeconomic background of the population. The north part of the city, district 1, 2, 3, 4, are the more affluent, and the south is the more low socioeconomic population of the city. So District 9 was the first one to introduce school choice, and the others followed 2 years later. And the program needed a government approval because middle schools and high schools in Israel are the vehicle for socioeconomic integration in the country, and there is a law of integration, and Tel Aviv was permitted to deviate from that law and introduce free school choice in its public school system. So until then, as I said, until 1994, about 40% of the students in district number 9 were bused to the north of Tel Aviv. There was no choice about which schools you were bused to. All the kids from a given primary school were bused to the same schools in the north. The other 60% were attending middle schools and high school in their district. The new choice program had several elements. At the end of 6th grade, kids could choose a secondary school, which they will attend from 7th grade to 12th grade. Each student could choose one of 5 schools. 3 of the schools were in the north in other districts. 2 in the set of 5 schools are from its own district. Students choose and rank from 1 to 5 the schools that they prefer to attend. All the kids in the same primary school had the same set of choices. So in primary school J, all kids could choose from the same set of 5 schools. Students could also list up to 8 friends with whom they want to be in school, and the system guaranteed that at least 2 of them will be with them in school. Not in class, but in school. That was important. I studied that aspect of the social network of students in different papers. Very important element. Kids, students, and parents decide and choose a school. Schools are not allowed to select students under no conditions. Actually, the admission system is done centrally by the city, and the city, by beginning of the end of August, get a list of who are the students that will attend next year the school. So schools had no hand whatsoever in selecting students. Okay? So it's a real school choice system. That's how I believe a school choice system should be. Only the parents and the kids should choose. The school should not have any role in deciding who will attend their schools. Schools were not allowed to let off and drop out students because of academic considerations, only because of behavioral concerns, and only after a committee at the city will approve such a decision. So practically, dropout of kids from schools, as you will see, declined dramatically because schools were taking the right to really select students after the first admission. Another very important role, perhaps it has to do with the topic of this conference, schools were allowed to expend as much as needed to absorb the demand for a given school. Sometimes it could happen in the short run by adding mobile home as classes in the yard of the school and closing other schools if needed. So if a school have lost its population and there isn't enough kids who want to attend a certain school, that school will be closed. And then it happened actually. And if a school is oversubscribed, it will expand as much as possible. If not possible at some point, then that school will become a campus and it will have more than one school under the same leadership. So the idea was to use successful schools and successful management of schools as perceived by parents and kids to allow the demand to be fulfilled as parents and kids see it. Okay? So that actually introduced the idea that basically every student gets basically his first choice. So the whole issue about matching and strategic behavior of kids in terms of ranking schools is irrelevant in the context of Tel Aviv. So we shouldn't worry about a New York mechanism or a Boston mechanism. Here we are guaranteeing students their first choice practically. I studied the short-term effect of the program, short-term and medium-term, basically starting 7th grade until the end of 12th grade, both on academic outcomes and on behavioral outcomes, social satisfaction of kids, behavioral violence, bullying, all of that during middle school and high school, in a paper that was published in 2010. What I show in that paper, that the program have improved academic outcomes significantly in the matriculation program in Israel. The matriculation program is a baccalaureate exam, like in France, like in Italy, like in Germany, where kids take a series of exams by the end of high school, and the certification in the baccalaureate is an admission criteria for universities, and your score, your average scores on the various tests that you take, basically allow universities to select students selectively into different programs. So it's a very, very high stakes set of exams. The program has increased dramatically the performance of students who were exposed to school choice at age 12, 13, until age 18 when I look at these outcomes. It also reduced dramatically the dropout rate, almost by 40% between 7th grade and 12th grade. And it had, as I said, a very dramatic climatic effect on the school environment in terms of the relationship between students and teachers, how happy are teachers, how many teachers actually dropped out from the teaching profession because they are burned out, all kinds of criteria that we collected data on over this 6-year period. But we are really interested in any educational intervention on the long-term outcomes, how it affects the well-being of individuals as they become adults and participants in society. So in this European Research Council project, I really focus on this long-term outcome, and what I do in this paper, I use the same platform that I've used to study the program after 6 years to follow kids until age 30. So they made the choice at age 12, 13. Now I observe them that they are adults, age 30, and I want to see how the choice they have made, them and their parents, when they were at the end of 6th grade, have affected them until now. So in terms of background, academic background, most of our research in economics of education over the last 20 years, which made great advances, have focused naturally on short-term and medium-term outcomes, mainly looking at test scores, on dropout rates, on schooling outcomes, and not much in terms of longer-term follow-up. However, we know that the rate of return to schooling at adulthood in the labor market in society is very, very high, very large, very important for intergenerational mobility. And there is now a trend in our field to focus also on long-term outcome. That's, of course, highly demanding because you need panel data, you need to observe individuals over time longitudinally, and that's not always easy to do. Most of the studies that have done something in this direction have been relying on administrative data, where the attrition in the sample is very, very small. And I can talk about a very selective few studies that have looked at the long-term effect of school choice, actually maybe 2, 3. One, the first paper is by Deming and co-authors, just came out 2 years ago, looked at the effect of a school choice program in Charlotte, Mecklenburg in North Carolina in the US. That's a program actually which is very similar to Tel Aviv, but it happened more than 10 years later by a court order that stopped busing and forced the school district to move into free school choice. But Tel Aviv have done it voluntarily 10 years earlier. But both programs have moved from busing to free school choice within a public school system. So that's the two very similar programs. And this paper showed that the program had long-term effect by looking at enrollment in colleges and completing college degrees. And it showed that there is an improvement of 14 percentage points in the completion rate of students who were exposed to the program in terms of their university studies. Another study by Chingos and Patterson, 2013, also looked at the school choice program in the US, find on average no effect, but strong effect on African American students. Another study in Sweden that I cite here, where they follow the effect of the Sweden 1992 reform, and basically in that paper they show not much of a result. This paper on school choice is basically joining a list of selective papers that looked at other interventions in terms of the impact in the long term. The first one is looking at Head Start. The second one looking at the preschool. Both of those are early childhood intervention. Chetty and co-authors of a paper using the Tennessee class size experiment to look at the effect of kindergarten classroom size and composition of students on earnings by age 27. That was published in the QG a few years ago. And then 2 more papers by Chetty and co-authors looking at value added of teachers in New York and how it impacted students when they are in the labor market and looking at the earnings. I have a paper that looked at pay for performance for teachers in high school and how it impacted students again at age 30. So I'll just summarize the finding. What I find in this paper is that the program that had major impacts on high school outcomes carried the same impact to post-secondary schooling. And I observed an improvement in enrollment in post-secondary schooling and in completion of years of schooling. What's important is that all the effect is concentrated on academic colleges. The system of post-secondary schooling in Israel has 2 main legs. One is 7 research universities, and the other part is about 60 colleges which confer academic degrees, mostly in humanities and social sciences. And what I find is that all the effect on post-secondary schooling in the population that I studied is concentrated on improvements in the non-university part of the academic system in Israel. This is expected because when I'm talking about low socioeconomic population in Tel Aviv, and those who are affected are marginal students who are improving their high school outcomes. And naturally, all the effect, as you will see, is in enrollment and completed schooling in academic colleges. And on top of that, there is a nice increase in earnings at age 30, and I'll show you how it dynamically evolved over time. No effects found on marriage rates, on number of children by age 30. So let me show you the results. This is the effect on enrollment rate in one of the 7 universities of Israel. Okay? Let me just mention here that in terms of the identification of the effect of the program, District 9 is affected. I use as comparison group before and after. District 6, 7, and 8 of Tel Aviv that were enrolled into the program only 2.5 years later. So in the first 2 years they were not affected. So that can be a good comparison group. Then there are 2 cities to the east of this District 9, 2 cities called Givatayim and Ramat Gan. They are part of this whole metropolitan area, so it's a basically continuous metropolitan area. They are adjacent to District 9, but they are independent in terms of their school system. They were not, of course, involved in the school choice, so they are another comparison group. And there is another city just south of District 9, you don't see it here, called Holon, which also is independent in terms of school authority. So I have 3 different comparison groups. I did the analysis comparing District 9 to each of the 3, plus to the average of all the 3, before and after. There's another method here called regression discontinuity that I use in order to compare some of District 9 to those who are close to the border with the 2 cities adjacent on the east, and the results from all these methods are relatively similar. So the same identification and empirical framework that I use to study the effect on high school outcomes is used to study the effect on long-term outcomes. The only difference is whatever I use as an outcome is now different, but everything else is the same. So if you want, the integrity of the protocol of the study is kept, and I do the same thing I've done before, but now focusing on different outcomes. So this is the effect on enrollment in high school. The first cohort graduated from high school in 2000. The first cohort that graduated from the program finished high school age 18 in 2000. And I basically estimate the effect of the program every year as we move along with the age of individuals until 2012. So what you see is that the green light is the estimated point effect. The gray area is the confidence interval. You see that it basically coincides with 0, no effect. The blue line is the average of the relevant outcome in the treated population. So you can see that by 2011, about 17% of the students in the program enrolled into a university. that the difference between them and the control group is 0. And you see the treatment effect is basically 0. Looking at years of schooling completed at universities, by the end of the period, and you see it's increasing gradually, on average, people in the sample of kids affected by the program completed about 0.7 years of schooling at the university, but it's the same in the control group. So no difference between treatment and control. So again, 0 effect here on university enrollment in university schooling. Then we move to the academic colleges. Okay, so academic colleges is something that mushroomed in Israel in the early 1990s. There was a big revolution in the post-secondary schooling system. Until then, you could really attend only one of the universities. From the mid-1980s, there was few colleges, and then there was a very liberal Minister of Education who allowed the supply to respond to the high demand for post-secondary schooling, and dozens of new colleges, all of them public, emerged. And by now, about 70% of the post-secondary schooling in Israel is basically in academic colleges. So what we see here is that gradually the enrollment rate in the treatment group started increasing. Why here and not earlier? Because for 3 years, these kids are in the military service. Okay? So they cannot go to a college. Girls for 2 years, boys for 3, at least, that's the minimum. And then you start, once they finish their military service, you start to see the increase. It takes about 2 years to converge to the maximum effect, which is about 5 percentage point advantage of those exposed to choice, free choice, over those that were not. And it's basically reached a plateau, and by 2011, that's the maximum you can get. If you look at the annual enrollment rate, not the cumulative one, basically by this point in 2011 is 0. Everybody of this cohort who went to post-secondary schooling completed, and all of them are out of schooling. And that's the gain in terms of years of schooling. On average, about a fifth of a year of schooling. The mean is just over half, so basically this is a 40% increase, which is very similar to the gains that we saw in terms of high school. So this is really a dramatic improvements, and you can see how it evolves over time. And by this point, again, it reaches a plateau, and I don't expect it to continue increasing, because by age 30, kids have basically finished their human capital investment and they're not in schooling anymore. Okay? So to summarize, what we see here is that the high school outcomes that improve due to the program when the kids were 17, 18 years old are translated into post-secondary schooling. Now, the high school outcomes that were improved were not only the quantitative one. It's not that you matriculated and you got a baccalaureate diploma. It's really the quality dimension of the program that improved as well. How many credit units you had, how many science subjects you studied, how many honor level subjects you studied, all of that was improved in this program. And now we see it improving in terms of post-secondary schooling. It's interesting to see the contrast between the outcome of this program when I look at the average of District 9 and when I look at the narrow band around the border between District 9 and the adjacent cities, Ramat Gan and Givatayim, which are more affluent. So anyone living on the border of Tel Aviv near those cities is also very much more, in terms of socioeconomic status, higher relative to the average of District 9 and similar. And in that subsample, actually the results are reversed. The effect is on university schooling with 0 effect on college enrollment. So it's a nice contrast in terms of the effect. Who are those who are affected by the program in more dimension? Okay, so we get more schooling. Do we get a higher paycheck at the end of the month? Okay? That's the question. So I observe every individual through the IRS of Israel, okay, so Your Royal Majesty, tax service but of Israel. I observe the employment and income of every individual. All this work is done in the protected data lab of the government of Israel. I cannot take the data out. So I have to work in the lab with RAs. And I have access to every tax record of every individual, and I know his income every year while he was in high school and from high school on until 2013. Okay? So I can compute as an outcome the annual earnings of an individual. I have annual earnings as salaried workers and as independent workers. I can sum them up, I can separate them and look at the effect on each component. What I'll show you now is on the total earnings of each individual per year. And I know whether an individual is employed or not as well every year, at least 1 month of the year. So this is the effect of the program on earnings of those exposed to school choice. This is the blue line is the average, and the scale for the average is on the right-hand side of the graph. So you can see that by 2013, the average earnings in the sample of treated kids who were exposed to free choice is almost 80,000 shekels. Okay? So 80,000 shekels, a shekel is about 6 shekels, about a pound. So that's almost 15,000 pounds a year on average in this sample. Okay? Those exposed to free school choice have earned about 3,000 more, and that's the scale that you, 3,000, 4,000, that's the scale on the left for the green line. Okay? So the treatment effect is according to the scale on the left, and the average is according to the blue line, and the scale is on the right. So on average, starting from about 2010, 2011, 2012, you see that there is an effect on earnings, and it's more or less stable. Of course, earnings is a more noisy measure compared to schooling. Schooling is a very precise measure. You know if you're enrolled or not. Here, in terms of earnings, there might be more measurement error. There is an increase, and then every year, and then it reaches more or less a plateau. Okay? So in the last 3-4 years of the sample, the gain is almost the same, about 4,000 shekels, and the mean is 80,000, so it's about 5 percentage points. Okay? 5 percentage points against a gain of about a fifth of a years of schooling. That's relatively high. It means that if all the increase in earnings is due to the increase in years of schooling, that implies a rate of return to post-secondary schooling of 1 year of over 20%. That's very, very high. In Israel, other estimates suggest that the rate of return to an academic year of schooling is about 15-16%. But there is an extra in the gain in earnings, which can be attributed to other dimensions of the effect of the program. It's not only 2 years of schooling. I said that the matriculation diploma have improved in quality. There is a premium in the labor market for quality. The matriculation diploma by itself, regardless of how many years of schooling you accumulate later, gives you a return in terms of earning. So we shouldn't be too surprised that the rate of return on years of schooling, if we compute it based on this data, is a bit higher than what we will get from other estimation. So that the program actually have led to gains through other mechanisms, partly through the achievements and partly through some other things. So that's the bottom line in terms of earnings. So practically, these kids made the choice at age 12, and now I look at their consequences at age 30, okay? And that's the only difference. The choice that was made at age 12 versus other students make a difference in terms. So this is the first study, actually, that document that school choice has an impact on earnings. So the study was published in the AR 2014 on the North Carolina paper, and looked only at the post-secondary schooling. Here we are able also to look at earnings. So Do I have more time?
Just 2 minutes.
Okay, so I think, as I said, this is part of an effort to look at the long-term outcomes. As an economist who sometimes advising the government, we know that there is a scarcity of resources, there is a budget constraint, there are alternative interventions, and we have to recommend which interventions are more effective and then more cost-effective. We cannot do everything, of course. So this is part of an effort to sort of picture returns in terms of long-term outcomes of various interventions. School choice, I mentioned the paper on pay for performance for teachers. I look at the long-term effect of training teachers. I look at the long-term effect of adding schooling hours to the schooling week. I look at interventions that extend the school year, peer effects, a bunch of interventions that I've studied in the past, and I'm now able to carry the work into adulthood. What I want to emphasize in terms of the external validity of these results, what do we learn from it? First of all, we shouldn't rely for policy on one study. We should do more studies. Okay? I would love to be able to do something like that in the UK, to get access to data. I know that in the UK it's almost impossible to link primary and secondary schooling outcome with labor market outcomes. We can do it now in Sweden, in Norway, we can do it now in the US. If there's anyone here who has an influence on the issue, we should be able to do it in the UK as well. Okay? So that's one thing that I think would like to emphasize. Second thing is that the school choice program in Tel Aviv, I think, was well designed. I designed 10 years later a similar system in Jerusalem, for the city of Jerusalem, and it's implemented now, and it's working also very well, even though in Jerusalem there are actually semi-private schools which we don't have in Tel Aviv. Okay, because the city is very heterogeneous, it allowed itself to have few quasi-private schools, but the system basically is very similar and it works very well. It is similar to some other programs in the world, and I think the evidence here in terms of external validity can be carried out to other environments. What I want to emphasize is something that I said at the beginning, and I really want to emphasize that. Free choice is a choice of the parents, no one else. Schools should never, that's my personal view based on my research and also my ideological belief, schools should never be allowed to select students on any criteria, okay? Any criteria. It's always the kids and the parents, okay? And we have enough evidence to suggest that the gain to students who are selectively selected into schools because of their eye colors or because of the income of their parents or because of their ability, etc., do not dramatically gain from being segregated from other kids who would like to study in something. Secondly, if you really think and talk about equal opportunity, there is no reason whatsoever to deprive kids from low socioeconomic background of attending what they think and their parents think is a good school. Okay? So always, and I give the example of charter schools in the US, charter schools in the US do not allow choice by schools. It's always by parents, and if there is oversubscription, it's by lottery. And charter schools in most urban areas in the US are doing very, very well. Okay? So I think the system of school choice should allow complete freedom to parents to decide where their kid should go to school. And again, in terms of the supply side, if there are failing schools, there is no reason to keep kids captive, prisoners in failing schools, either because they grew up in a deprived community or their parents are low income or whatever reason. There's no reason to punish kids twice, both that they are growing up in relatively poorer environment and the schools that they have to attend are poor schools. That's really sort of a social crime. Okay? So kids should have the right to move and to study anywhere they want. And if the mapping system of preferences suggests that some schools will be closed and others will be expanded, it should be it.
Well, thank you very much. So I'd just like, very briefly, I'm afraid, Henrik, you've got 5 minutes, because I want these people to be able to put some, I'm sure, questions they're bursting to ask before we move to the next session. So 5 minutes from the start.
Okay, thank you. I have to say, this is path-breaking research, so I hope that you enjoyed having it presented for you. I certainly did. It's the first study ever to link school choice to labour market outcomes, employment, and especially to earnings at age 30, when people are really established on the labour market. And the outcome measures are of obvious importance, and an earnings increase of 5%, it really suggests to me that school choice is something, or properly designed school choice, as is stressed at the end, is something that we should really not do without. So I trust your findings. I find them really important, and I have 3 brief remarks if time allows. I think perhaps the most important thing in this study is that we are comparing with a baseline where lots of students were bused to another district. So we are not really comparing school choice with a situation where there were some choice to start with. And some school choice to start with would typically be residential school choice. But here with busing, you cannot really choose in any way. And in that sense, the choice opportunities increased a bit more in this with this program compared with if you would introduce it so here in England and in several other countries. So, yes, so maybe the effects were larger in Tel Aviv than what you would find, say, here in England. I also think that this study nicely complements your previous work that demonstrates the same program increased outcomes, earlier outcomes in the education system. But here it's a small program, at least it has been expanded, so it's a small program that you are studying here. But what would you expect if you rolled out this program? And it has happened, I know, to go to Tel Aviv and also all over Israel. So because it seems that most of the positive effect was explained by people going into more people going into higher education. And if you expand this to the national level, you will have more competition for places at higher education. And can you admit all of those that would be applying for university education due to an expanded national program? And wouldn't that also, if not, wouldn't that also reduce the kind of findings you would expect from a national program? So finally, I would like also to mention the kind of supply side of this. It was interesting to hear that there was a supply expansion as a part of this program, and so how important was that for those gains to be materialized? I don't know. So Gabriel mentioned in his introduction that sometimes with school choice, the kind of final location of children's is not that different from what you would just get from going to using proximity or catchment areas. And so here, how did parents really choose? I mean, did a lot of students end up in schools that far away from where they lived? And is that, how important was that for bringing about the positive earnings effects? Thanks.
Right, very, very quickly. Quick questions, quick answers. Who's first? You've spoken before. Anybody hasn't spoken? Yes, Matt, you. Can you say who you are and where you're from?
Jordahl of mainly SUWT or Teachers Union. I can understand. Thank you. I can understand that choice in itself can be a motivating factor because people feel empowered. But I was just curious: was anything done about what the choice was based on? You know, because I think that would be an interesting aspect as to what was actually valued there, and whether it was the local schools that did largely miss out on it.
Well, let me combine my answers in the two. One, you raised very, very important points. One was the political economy of choice in the city. How can you allow kids to choose and fulfill their first choice and not sort of raise the objections of people in the community in the north who would object and probably could derail the program because, and indeed appeal to the Supreme Court twice, etc. So expanding the supply is a way of dealing with the political economy problem of the program and actually getting the people in other areas basically not to fight the program. Okay, and I think that the city leadership understood that. Okay, now something to mention: before the program, from District 9, 45% were bused up north. Okay, 7 complete primary schools, all their kids were bused up north. After the program, how many of the proportion of the students in the south also decided to go up north? So 44%. So almost the same proportion of kids decided to opt out of their district and study up north. But it wasn't necessarily the same type of kids and the same primary school. Okay? So the same proportion. So it's really reallocation, and that's the matching. I mean, why is the program so successful? So you mentioned in your talk. First of all is the matching between kids and schools. Okay? That was improved. Competition, closure of failing schools, expansion of successful schools. There's all kinds of things. Fulfilling freedom, ambition, motivation. So that was one aspect. Second aspect that you mentioned is also crucial, is the general equilibrium effect of the program. The program could achieve expansion in university enrollment because there was also expansion in all those colleges along those years that the program basically grew up over the years. But I think the same idea that allow expansion of supply in high school should be carried on to expansion of supply at post-secondary school. If there is a higher demand and there is no capacity constraints, why not allow anyone who wants to study post-secondary schooling to fulfill his desire? So in my case, there was no feedback, negative feedback in terms of general equilibrium crowding out of other kids in universities. In universities, the demand was not so increased. We saw that. And in the colleges, all of them were small enough to be able to expand further. Now, your point about what was it?
About the reason behind the choice.
Right. So this is something that always is brought up that really make me angry a little bit. The people from poor background or low income cannot really know what's good for them and cannot make good choices. So what you should do is provide more information. No, I'm not saying it about you. So that's how we designed it. We basically provided information at schools and fairs, market fairs, when we gathered all schools to pitch about their programs and suggest the program to the parents. And parents got a lot of information, the children and the parents. It's true that you had to feed them with a spoon and convince them that it's important to choose, and basically they had to. There was no default of not choosing. You had to choose. So you could do it at the school in front of a computer, or you could do it at home later on at the beginning in the internet. Now it's done in the internet, and there's no problem of parents basically making a choice.
One more question. Anybody in the audience got one more question? Yes, sir.
Josh Henrik from the Another Foundation. You talked a little bit in response just now to how you might separate out the changes in the supply side, so the closing down of unsuccessful schools, the expansion of other ones, which obviously may be contributing to some of the positive effects on school choice policy. Can you say a little bit more about how your comparison to the control group operated, particularly thinking about the other changes that might have occurred in the population of those different areas during the period that you were scrutinising, and also other changes that might have happened in the school systems of those control group districts that you were using as your comparison to the effect.
So both papers are giving a lot of attention to identification. Okay? So it's not netting out any correlation from the causal effect of the program. I have a comparison group. I have two pre-cohorts, so cohorts of 6th graders who went into 7th grade 2 years and 1 year before the program was implemented, both in the control group and in the treatment group. So that actually provide for me sort of the benchmark for what would have happened without the program. And then the composition is kept the same, and I follow the same people as 100% of them. There is no attrition whatsoever, all the way to age 30. So if there were differences at baseline, they are controlled for. There are various ways that I do the exercise. I don't want to go into the technical details, but I pay a lot of attention to these issues.
Right, well, I'm afraid that concludes this session, although I know there'll be a lot more questions to ask. So.